Hey team, this is Christian coming at you live from my apartment floor. For those of you who may not know, I do spend some time in my professional life making videos, so I thought it would make some sense to put one together real quick just to talk about what tactics we're going to be putting forth onto the pitch this coming season. But before I do, it's going to be important that I first lay out what things looked like last year. I'm part of one of my teams in the fall season. This is going to look pretty familiar. If you are not, this is just going to give you a brief overview. I have two sets of magnets here. One are red and white, the other are yellow and black. For those of you who do not know, I'm a huge Borussia Dortmund fan, so we're going to be representing our team with the yellow and black magnets, as those are Dortmund colors. Anyway, of course, the first position you have to cover on the field is going to be your goalkeeper. We, of course, only have one. Hopefully, that's going to come through clear enough on the screen. Now, last season, we played with two at the back.
And this is what that looked like.
And then going forward into the midfield, we usually, well, honestly, we did. We played with one single defensive midfielder, and then we played with two more midfielders in the center. And then we played with an attacking midfielder. Now, without getting too technical, we played with what's called a false nine. If you want to know a little bit more about that, I'd be happy to make a video kind of explaining what a false nine is. But for the purposes of simplicity and just keeping names kind of straight, in the fall season, I referred to as the attacking midfielder. It was actually a false nine. Like I said, it's actually a pretty simple concept. Yeah, for the sake of simplicity, I just refer to it as an attacking midfielder. We then played with two wingers. And the idea here was that if we played against a team that played, for example, a 3-3-2, which I'll lay out real quick. So if we played against a team that played in this kind of shape with the red and white making up that 3-3-2 shape, the idea was that we would be able to dominate the center of the field, where that diamond is. We would be able to work the ball around in that space. And while that started to work really well towards the end of last season, we often got easily overwhelmed in two areas. The first was in the width. The first was we would often get pulled out wide by the outside midfielders. Sorry, that magnet's kind of weak. And we'd get pulled out wide and we'd get kind of overloaded on the outside of the field and we'd lose our shape there. The other thing that would often happen was the opposing team would just hit a ball long, and because this became a 2 versus 2 situation, it was really easy for them to kind of overrun to make a run behind and we get caught off there. So I spent some time over the off season, spent some time over the winter thinking about what we could do differently. But before I do, actually it'd be wise of me to take these back off. So now before I talk about what we're going to do next season, I should first kind of explain why I did things the way I did in the fall season. Because with those kind of weaknesses in mind, you may be wondering, well, why did I do that? And the reason for that is because right now we play 9 versus 9. We play in a 9 versus 9 field. But by the time your U13 year comes around, and for the U12s out there that's coming out very quickly, the whole reason for this was because I thought it would make the transition from the 9 versus 9 field to the 11 versus 11 field much easier. And that was because the only difference between that and 11 versus 11 is the inclusion of two fullbacks, two outside backs. Sorry about my quality of those magnets. But the inclusion of a 2 and a 3, a right back and a left back, and again, can definitely explain why that is in a future video if you'd be interested. In this system, in what is essentially a 4-3-3, if you watch Liverpool play, they often play with Roberto Firmino playing as a false nine. And so the idea here was, and also the Barcelona team of 2009 did this as well. And so my thought was just doing this, making it so going from 9 versus 9 to 11 versus 11, the only difference would be the inclusion of fullbacks. And while that is still definitely true, I have decided over over the winter off season, spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I have decided that a tactical change is needed. So I'm going to cut ahead and I'm going to show what that's going to look like. All right, and so the only real difference that's going to happen is that we're going to drop the defensive midfielder and we're going to add an extra center back. So this is what the shape is going to basically look like. Now also, the two central midfielders are going to have to drop back a little bit. And this is going to switch the system from what's called a single pivot to a double pivot. And basically that just means that if you're in the back three, when we are building up play, that just means they have an extra midfielder to pass to. It creates a little bit more passing opportunities for the build-up play, going from defensive third to the midfield third. And of course, when this happens, we still maintain a pretty strong triangle in the center of midfield, so we can work the ball around in the center of the field, and then work the ball out wide to the 7 and 11.
Hey, all, Christian again. Just was listening back to what I was saying in this video, and I apologize for that little moment of jargon there. The 7 and the 11 refers to the right winger and the left winger, respectively. So the number 7 is the right winger, and the number 11 is the left winger. It's kind of the same story as to why the number 2 is often associated with the right back and the number 3 is associated with the left back, and I can explain why the 7 and the 11 are kind of associated the way they are in that kind of follow-up video where I explain that numbering system a little bit better. Sorry about that.
And what the 7 and 11 do in both of these systems is that, especially when the ball gets to the 9, the false 9, the idea here is that they split in. The idea is that they cut towards the center. So I've often had some questions when I put a left-footed player at the right wing. Don't always understand why I do that, and the really reason for that is so your left foot is actually going to be the one when you cut inside. The ball's going to be on your left foot. So it's there for you to use your stronger foot on, and it's the same with a right-footed player on the left side. If you watched the Bayern Munich teams when Arjen Robben and Frank Ribery played for those teams, Robben was a left-footed right winger, Ribery was a right-footed left winger. And if you were to look up Arjen Robben goals, they basically all look the same. It's basically Robben coming in from the outside, getting the ball into a stronger left foot, and shooting kind of from the edge of the box. Now, in terms of shape, I would love to get to the point where this player is able to pinch up, and we kind of recreate that diamond in midfield. But of course, when that happens, communication needs to take place, and these two need to pinch in. And there it is. We're right back to that 2-4-2 at the midfield diamond. But for the sake of simplicity, this is what the shape is going to be. Now, what's this going to do? What's this going to do when we play against a team that plays a 3-3-2? Let me get that team set back up. And we're back, and sorry about that number 7 magnet. Ideally, it'd be a little bit wider. It's just a weak magnet, and the way I have the board set up, it's going to slide down a little bit. But basically what we have now is a version of a 3-3-2 against my version of a 3-3-2. And what happens here is we still have that dominance in midfield. We still have a 3 versus 1 in the midfield. But now what happens is we have a little bit more width in the defense. So if a ball comes out wide to this 11 here, instead of the 8, the number 8 here pressuring, I actually want the number 2 to pressure. I want the number 2 to push up. And so that's creating a little bit of pressure. But now I'm sure you're thinking, well, what about the 10? And this is where we need a bit of fluidity of shape, and the other two center backs need to slide over to provide cover. So at this point, it actually would be something a bit more like this in terms of shape. But of course, it's getting a little bit more complicated at that point. And this is something that it's only going to make sense this is something that's going to make a lot more sense when we get out onto the field itself, and we start experiencing this actually happening in a game. There's only so much that I can realistically show on the tactics board. But that is how we deal with the ball getting out wide. is we actually push a defender forward to press, and the midfield shifts over a little bit, and the remaining back two of the three, slide over to cover the space. The other thing that's going to happen here is get us reset. The other thing that's going to happen here is a long ball, and the trick is really with any team is that you always want to have one more defender. So in this case, we have 3 defenders against 2 forwards. You always want to have what's known in math as n+1. So if they have 2 forward, we want to have 3 back. If they have 1 forward, so say they drop a player back, maybe they're playing a 3-4-1. Then while we're still going to keep a 3 in the back shape when we're building up, when we have the ball, and especially when we got it up wide, when we got it up to our forward two, the 7 and the 11, when we got up to the wingers, then I would love to see, like I said, a little bit of shape fluidity and a little bit of tactical nuance from the players on the field. Now, as I've mentioned before, I want this to be a decision that is made by the players themselves. I want, especially in this case, whoever it is who's playing the center of the back three, I want to see him or her making that decision for him or herself. Now, as I'm sure most of you know by now, I am possession oriented. I want to see us moving the ball. I want to see us dominating the play. And I do think the best way for that to happen is to dominate the center of the field. But at this point, you're probably wondering, well, you played the 2-4-2 with a midfield diamond with an eye on 11 versus 11. What is this shape going to do? What's this going to look like when we start looking a little bit forward, we start looking at 11 versus 11. Let me pull down the red team, and start showing that off. All right, and we're back. And we're back to the 3-3-2 with that midfield triangle now. And so, like I said, now I'm going to explain a little bit about what this is going to look like when we jump to 11 versus 11. Or at least the way I envision it looking like when we jump to 11 versus 11. So as you know, we have 9 on the field right now. And in order to make 11, we need 2 more. And so the ideal shape for me, I'm a big fan of the 4-3-3, in particular with the false 9 specifically. So the only difference here is going to be the inclusion of a fullback, and again, sorry for the weak magnet, and the inclusion of a defensive midfielder. And we're right back to that midfield diamond. And what is going to happen ideally, and if you watch Pep Guardiola's current Manchester City squad, this is actually something you see them do quite frequently. Although recently they've been playing a little bit more of the false 9. In the build-up to this season, kind of leading up to where they are now, they were playing with more of a true 9, usually Sergio Aguero. But lately, Kevin De Bruyne has been taking up the role of a false 9. Lionel Messi really is the pinnacle of the false 9. But of course, you can't really talk about the false 9 without talking about Rinus Michels, and of course the man who became the real first false 9, that being Johan Cruyff. These are guys that are really important to me. For reasons I can explain in the future. And of course, Cruyff went on to coach Pep Guardiola, who's the Manchester City team boss now. But what Guardiola did when he first arrived at City was he played a 4-3-3. And with very wide wingers. Usually, you see wingers kind of pinch in. But Guardiola's idea was to have essentially this kind of team shape where his fullbacks, the 2 and the 3, and again, I can explain that later. The idea was that they would do an action called inverting, where they would become essentially central midfielders, and they would be more participant in the build-up, and they would kind of overload the midfield with the 8 and the 10, and again, can explain kind of the 8 and the 10 at a later time. But Guardiola's idea was to have both his center backs invert, and to have his winger stay wide, while his 8 and 10, his center midfielders, pushed up. But essentially, Pep had the same problem that we did last season, and that was they get beaten by long balls. And if you watch the Premier League with an eagle eye the way I do, you would know that Pep's first season was somewhat of a disappointment. They didn't do nearly as well as they wanted to. So that required Guardiola to be a little bit tactically flexible. And the conclusion that he arrived at was that he wanted two center backs to stay back, and he wanted his right back, Kyle Walker, usually, to stay behind and to become that third center back. While his left back usually, then that's a role that's changed over time. He's had a few different left backs over his time at City. But it would essentially start looking a bit more like this. You take away a few players, and now all of a sudden that doesn't look too different now, does it? And this is essentially the exact same thing that I'm going to want to see happen when we make the jump to 11 versus 11. With the lone exception of I want to get these guys a little bit wider, and I want the 9 to drop off for the false 9 role, while the 7 and the 11s, they do the inverting action. And like I said, this is getting kind of theoretical. We're not quite there yet. We're still at the 9 versus 9. But when we get there, we'll get there. And I do believe that playing this system, the one that we're going to be looking at this season with playing, back to this system, I do think that is what's going to be most successful in getting us prepared for the 11 versus 11 level, which is, of course, my ultimate goal as a coach. So let me know if you would like to see some more videos like this, kind of explaining a little bit of tactical history, a little bit about how things have changed over time. I'd be happy to make them. So just let me know. But ultimately, this is where we're at, and this is where I do believe we're going. So thanks for tuning in, and I will see you soon.